Back to Europe. I mean, we now have this terrible war going on in Ukraine, and we're not being told the truth, and it's very difficult to figure out the truth. RFK Jr. just came out. There's probably 300,000 Ukrainian casualties. I mean, much higher than we've been told, and the war seems to drag on forever. What's your scenario for an outcome or a solution for that war? How is it going to continue?
Well, I think it's going to be a long war, and I think that the Russians will ultimately prevail. And I think they're not going to conquer Ukraine. It's not like they're going to run their army up to the Polish and Romanian border, topple the regime, and incorporate Ukraine into a greater Russia, the way many people in the West describe their ambitions. But what they're going to do is they're going to conquer a huge chunk of Ukrainian territory, and they're going to turn Ukraine into a dysfunctional rump state.
But the whole West does not want that, and we said we're going to prevent that.
Absolutely. No.
The West is going to prevent that conquering of territory.
Yeah, I would say more than that. The West is not simply dedicated to preventing that from happening. The West is committed to defeating Russia in Ukraine, beating the Russians on the battlefield in Ukraine, weakening the Russian economy badly, and in effect, knocking the Russians out of the ranks of the great powers.
Mm-hmm. But you think Russia will prevail and the West will probably have to give in? Or...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is a war of attrition where Ukrainians are fighting Russians. The West is not involved with ground troops in the war. Mm-hmm. The West is supplying the Ukrainians, but it's not doing the fighting. Mm-hmm. So in a war of attrition, the key question is how many people are in Russia, how many people are in Ukraine, what's the relative population size of those two countries, and then also what does the balance of artillery look like? Because artillery really matters in a war of attrition. It's, as we used to say in the US Army, artillery is the king of battle. Now, if you look at the numbers here, Russia has, at this point in time, somewhere between a 4-to-1 and a 5-to-1 advantage in population. This is a massive advantage. In terms of artillery, the Russians have, it's hard to get a firm number, somewhere between a 5-to-1 and a 10-to-1 advantage in artillery. And the West does not have the ability to give Ukraine enough artillery or artillery ammunition, shells as we say, to equal the Russian capability. So the Russians greatly outnumber the Ukrainians in terms of population size, and they greatly outnumber the Ukrainians in terms of how much artillery each side has. And in a war of attrition where the two armies are standing toe-to-toe and beating the living daylights out of each other, the side that has a larger population and has more artillery is likely to win. And in this case, that's the Russians. And as I say, I think what will happen is they will end up conquering a lot of territory in Ukraine, and they will annex that territory to Russia. They've already annexed the Crimea, and they have already annexed 4 oblasts that formerly belonged to Ukraine. And I think they'll end up taking even more territory. Mm-hmm.